So I just wanted to share our usability report from when our teammates recently conducted a user feedback session and ran usability tests and focus group discussions with CHWs. We covered the latest UI updates, including training cards, the floating action button, as well as the upcoming CHT navigation updates. So our goal of the test was to understand the learnability of these changes and sample end user reactions to them. So on the slide, you can see the training card screens that we showed them. We use them to train CHWs on the new action button. We can see that we give an introduction of what the training cards are, have an example of what the UI used to look like, what the button looks like now, and ask for confirmation that they understand. And some of our key findings were that most CHWs have never used training cards before, and that the concepts and content of the cards were needing to be explained initially. So it was difficult for CHWs to see the cards right away and understand exactly what they were meant for. But once they had gone through the process once and learned what the cards were, they were able to understand newer concepts. And yeah, so once they learned the concepts of what the cards were, it was easier for them to learn the UI. Secondly, we gave CHWs the task that required using the floating action button from their learnings on the training cards. So we learned that the majority of users were able to use the new UI correctly after reading the training cards, and they ranked the task as very easy. It was a task that we gave them with no additional prompts or information. We just asked them to complete a registration and let them do what they did with the knowledge that they had. And most CHWs found this new floating action button easier to use than the previous version and stated that it provided a simpler experience. And just to clarify, there is a lot more detail in the report. You can find it on the forum. I'm just giving you a quick snapshot in the interest of time. So lastly, I wanted to cover the navigation that we showed them. So we showed CHW's prototypes of the new navigation in a focus group discussion. And these updates included the tabs moving from the top of the screen to the bottom, as well as title bars, as you can see, people and households on the first two slides or screens, and the new menu drawer. So all of the participants that were in the discussion group were quite receptive to the updates. They noted that the changes didn't affect the core functionality of their app, so the learning curve didn't appear to be very steep. And yeah, generally positive reactions to that, details on the forum. And that's it for me. Thanks, everyone.
I'm going to put a link in the chat for people to follow up on later. It's the same link you see at the top there. I'm going to hit these 4 things briefly, but this is mostly a reminder to go look at the roadmap, and you're going to hear more of this stuff from all the groups shortly. So I'm going to cover these 4 for now, though. So these are things that, as was mentioned, these are our OKRs, which we set quarterly, but our roadmap is dictated by our OKRs. So what you'll see is a set of things that we're working on now or next, and you'll see there's this later column of things we're aware of that we aren't necessarily working towards on this quarter. So for the 4 focus groups I'm going to talk about here, I'm going to hit on. So for care teams, we have a big one right now that's going on is user analytics. Again, you'll hear about this shortly, but that's something that we're working on this quarter that we know will benefit us in the things that we do in the coming quarters. Next up for allies, there's this work going on for form debugging. So helping app developers work through their forms and the logic in an easier way. So again, this is for app developers and for building apps. For infrastructure, that bottom left one you see, it says scalability. That's kind of a common theme you've probably noticed for the whole year so far. But this idea of scalability we know is a big concern. There are national deployments that are using the CHT and seeking to add large quantities of users fast. So this is a big area for us. The last one here is for ecosystem. We're working on this says dashboard data. It has to do with getting the data into a place where you can process it in a dashboard in a scalable way for high volume. So really, this goes together with that concept of scalability. We know we have these large national deployments that have a lot of needs around data analysis, and we want to make sure that people can get what they need on those dashboards and have them keep working when you hit those high volumes. So again, this is a small portion of what's going on. It's a variety of things across all the different focus groups. For more detail, go to the link that you see above or in the chat. Those are in GitHub format. So each one is a ticket that you can put comments on. So if you've got a question or just want to talk to someone about them, comments on there are good. And as always, the forums are a really great place to have these kinds of discussions. And the people that will speak soon about this stuff are eager to get into any conversation around any of this stuff.
I wanted to share some updates on something that we've been working on related to the OKR goal that Craig had just mentioned around user analytics. So next slide, please. So really our goal with this work is to deeply understand how health workers are interacting with the CHT. And as you've heard Nicole and Leah discuss in the past, we're constantly doing this qualitative research, like interviewing CHWs and doing usability testing, shadowing, surveys. All of these techniques are really revolve around being in person with the health workers and hearing stories about how they use and perceive the CHT. But we also want to look at how they are actually using the CHT. So how often, for example, how often and when are they visiting the targets tab? We hear people asking us these questions, and we're not really able to see that today. But with this usage analytics data, we expect to answer some of these types of questions, but also we expect to really inspire other questions that we can then focus some of our qualitative research on, and really, talk to the health workers about these different things. So there's this really important relationship between the qualitative research, so talking to people, and the quantitative research, actually looking at the data. And really until now, we've only been able to really employ the qualitative research techniques. So I'm really excited to be able to have a fuller picture of CHT usage. And to do this, we've integrated the CHT with an open source product analytics platform called Matomo. And today I'm going to take you through a quick demo to show you a few of the kind of key features that I'm excited about in this platform. And really my expectation is that this will inspire you all to think of and share, the types of questions that you have about how users are interacting with the CHT in the health systems that you're working in. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Cool. So I'm going to start out here just talking about, so I'm going to kind of start high level on things that are a little bit pretty tangible, and then I'm going to go into some things that are a little bit more exploratory. So yeah, one of the things that is kind of interesting to be able to see here are just in terms of when people are actually using the CHT, like what days. So we can see the visits by the day of the week here. I'm looking at data from 2023, and we can see, for example, that health workers are mostly using the CHT on Wednesdays, for example. Little ramps up on Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday is the peak, as you would expect, not much on Saturday or Sunday. And we can also see, for example, throughout the day, what are some of the peak times that they're actually using it. So it seems like, users are typically using it a little bit more in the mornings and a little bit less in the afternoons. So this is some types of data that we'll be able to see here just from a high level perspective. Another thing that I'm excited to see here, I'm just going to pull in a little bit less data here, is page views. So here we have on this list on the left, is that people can see that okay? Cool. The list on the left are the different pages in the CHT. So for example, this would be based off of the contact type. So you're on the contacts tab looking at contact type of clinic, which is actually a household. This is just the contacts tab. This is a particular person's profile you're looking at, task tab. So we can see things like total page views, unique page views per session. And I'm just going to pull up a really interesting chart here for this row evolution. I'm going to look at the targets tab because this is one we do get asked about sometimes or pretty regularly. So one of the things that we can see here, I might need to expand my screen a little bit. There we go. Let's just look, for example, so for example, this is a representation of when users are viewing the targets tab in the CHT. So we can see total page views and again, unique page views on top of each other here. So, you know, we'll be able to see, for example, if it was like a flat line throughout the month and then a big spike at the end of the month, like when CHWs typically have the monthly meetings with supervisors, for example, we can see that they're not accessing the targets tab throughout the month at all. So based off of this, we can then try to understand, is it not useful at all? Why aren't they accessing it? Is it not updating? Those types of things. And that's how we could then go focus some of our qualitative research by just going and talking to health workers. So this type of data can help illuminate different potential challenges and inspire us to ask certain questions with other research techniques. So that's the type of thing that we can see here. So we can see this for any of the pages. Another thing that is really I'm excited about are the transitions. So that's going to be probably a little bit small there. Get that part out of the way. So I'm going to pull up a specific page here. Where is it here? Oops. There we go. Okay. So this can help us understand certain features in terms of their usage. So some of you might remember there is the household task feature. This is a feature where when you're on your task tab and you tap on a particular task, so Beatrice Bass, for example, you go through the care guides and complete the task. In the CHT, you can configure it so that it shows up the other tasks for that household on a separate screen. And if you tap on the X here, it just closes it out and goes back to the task screen, or you can go ahead and complete these a different task for that household. We wanted to understand how often users are actually completing another one of those tasks versus just canceling out of the screen. And with these transitions feature here, we can know that. So I've selected this task group page. On the left-hand side of the screen, the only way you can get to this page is through another task. So that's why on the left-hand side, these are all tasks, task pages. The right-hand side here tells us where they went to after they saw this screen. And I can see that actually 55% of the people that saw this page actually canceled out of it and went back to the list of tasks, whereas 9% of them went on and did one of the tasks and did a delivery task in the list. Another 9% did these danger sign follow-up tasks in the list. So this can help us understand the usage of certain features in the app and basically how people are navigating through the app. So I'm really excited about this feature. Another one that is similar to this, but gives you a much fuller picture. And again, this one, there's a lot to show here. But this shows us the path that users take when they come into the app. So in this example, we have 9 users that when they opened their CHT, the first thing they saw was the Messages tab. And I can see that out of those 9, 7, the next thing they went and did went to the Contacts tab, whereas 2 of them came to the Reports tab. And then from the Reports tab, some of them went to the Contacts tab, some of them went to the Tasks tab, and then from the Tasks tab, some went to go on and complete a task directly from there. And we can see these flows in several steps. But we're really excited about this because it can help identify what are the typical navigation paths that users are taking in the CHT. And based off of this, we can identify areas that we might want to, or we might be able to streamline what those paths are, so they're not going back and forth for things. So really excited about this feature as well. So yeah, these are some of the real key features that I'm excited about. And I really expect that this will help us deeply understand how users are interacting with the CHT. And yeah, we'd like to work with you to make these insights available to the health systems that you're working on. So yeah, please reach out either on the forum or to me directly. And I'd love to help you understand how the CHWs in your health systems are interacting with CHT. And that's
I wanted to make sure that folks know that Watchdog is continuing to evolve. Most recently, we released 1.8.2, I believe, and this adds the ability to reach out to your Postgres instance and make sure that it's up to date with Couch database via Couch to PG. This backlog is often important for folks who have things like Clipfolio and superset dashboards to know that the data is potentially out of date. Another big update is that the Allies has had a change in our focus, in our OKRs rather, for the Q3, which is that we're going to be working on uplifting Enketo to the latest version in CHT Core. We've already started on this, and we have some preliminary work that we're doing to get ready for the upgrade itself, but you can go ahead and track all this in GitHub. We're really hoping this will increase the performance of CHT for complex forms that have a lot of logic and often can be slow to render when the form logic is too hard for the current CHT version. So for the demo itself, I'm going to be using Watchdog to ingest a Postgres query. This is something that we knew was coming and will allow partners who have data coming in from either external sources into Postgres that they want to render as a visualization or use in an alert in Watchdog, in Grafana and Prometheus, as well as partners that have, like internally at Medic, we might consider our own other teams like the app monitoring team and app services. They want the ability to take their data ingest tool that they've been using for internal monitoring alerting, which is a peer project to Watchdog, and that's currently in Superset, and they'd like to be able to import that into Prometheus and Grafana, which is what the Watchdog underpinnings are. So I'm going to be going through these 5 steps right now. The first thing I'm going to do is set up a Postgres exporter. This is going to be another Docker container that mirrors the same process we use for Couch to PG, that backlog metric, but instead will allow you to have a custom query that we saw here on this first page. We're going to then configure Prometheus to scrape those metrics. So we'll convert the SQL to a Prometheus export, and then Prometheus will need to know to ingest that. We're going to update our Docker Compose file so that it knows to start these containers and have some extra mount points. Finally, we'll look at the dashboard and how to prototype it in the Explorer, and then export that dashboard back to JSON. So to start, we have some files here, and the queries one is the first one that we'll look at. So this is should be very familiar, right, for those that use SQL. Here's SQL. This is the literal SQL that you would use to test the query, make sure it is working. This one happens to be from a materialized view, So there's a much larger query that happens before this, and then we get the simplified one. And then you'll add some metadata on how it's going to look in Grafana. And see, our next step is to set up the scrape config. So we have that set up here. Scrape config is very simple. This is just saying that there's a URL. This is going to be a Docker address here. There's a URL with a port, and you should scrape it every 5 seconds, and that will allow Prometheus to ingest it. And then we have, let's see, keep on our steps here. Yes, we need to update the Docker Compose so that when you start up Watchdog, it knows to chain all this together. If anyone's looked at the Watchdog setup documentation for running cAdvisor, this is the exact same process that you'll be doing. So when we look in the Compose file, we're going to have 3 main things. The first thing that we do is we have this mount point. So that takes that scrape config that I showed you earlier and allows Prometheus to have access to it. We also are a little bit ahead of ourselves, but we're pre-configuring Grafana with the JSON from the dashboard. I'll show you this in a second and come back to this line. And then we have this Postgres exporter. And this is just stuff you'll copy and paste in. The most important thing that we're doing here, though, is we're adding in that queries file that you saw. We're passing in the credentials to connect to Postgres, and then we're telling the exporter, this is where you're going to run the query from. So now that we have the Postgres exporter set up, we have the scrape config so that Grafana or Prometheus knows to scrape it. We have the Docker Compose file all set up. We can actually go ahead and start the Docker so that we can test our config. So I've already tested this, so I'm fairly confident it works. We'll find out. But all we've really done here is added on this extra container to run alongside the existing Watchdog stack. So when you go over to your browser, where it wasn't working, and now we can load it up. And where I've started off here is in the Explorer area in Grafana, and that's under the hamburger menu on the upper left. And this allows you to reach out to new data sources that you've added to Prometheus and Grafana and kind of explore what it might be like to add them. So we're going to look for, I forget what it is, but I actually want to show you how to remember. Oops. So this upper topmost line here is what it's going to show up in Prometheus as. So replication failure reasons is what I can search for. So if I go and select metric, it's going to have tons and tons and tons of them, and it'll be confusing, but I know that I can look for replication, and helps if you know how to spell for those that are, it's early in the morning like me. Whew. Okay, so here's our field that we just added that's been populated with the data. So if you go ahead and run the query, you'll come up with this. Right now it's showing as a graph, but we can see that this is all the SQL that we had initially put in that query file. It's been exposed by the exporter, it's being ingested by Prometheus, and now Grafana can start rendering into a graph. I'm not going to go through the customizations, but there's a whole process of how you can format this and which fields you want to show, what latest values you want to show. And what you end up with is a table that looks like this. So this is just the actionable data that we need, which lists the top reasons that CHWs connected to this CHT instance have for failing to replicate. So you can focus on the ones that have the highest number of problems, right? 36,000 is here. down for the long tail of 214 down here. So now at this point, you could attach alerts to this. So if there's an increase in this dramatically, you would want to know about it. Or if you just want to review it once a month to see if the trends have changed month over month, whatever makes sense for you. I want to do one last thing, which is to show you that you can save this JSON. So there's a way of going up here and exporting it. And when you export this JSON, you can save it to this file. And I'm not going to force you to read JSON. This is JSON. It represents the entire dashboard. What's important to know, though, is you can now save this to disk. You can put it in revision control, and you can programmatically deploy it to a dashboard without having to go through the whole process of adding it in Explorer and formatting the table and remembering which columns you have. It'll all be done. So this is actually how internally at CHT, the Allies team updates Watchdog using the existing dashboards separate from this SQL effort.
Maybe while you were testing and going through different data sets, what kind of challenges did you encounter that maybe you'd like to warn people about so that they're aware as they test?
Sure. If we have extra time, I actually can, I had 10 minutes for my demo, but I had to cut a testing part out of the demo because it didn't fit in the 10 minutes. But what it did is it talked about more granularly checking the data flow as it came through the different elements. So there's a way of looking at the Postgres exporter. I had a lot of issues with seeing some errors in Docker that I wasn't sure what they were. And then I realized that they were not actual errors, they were just warnings. And being able to look at the Prometheus exporter, which has a web interface, I could actually see that my queries were there. And then further down the line, the same thing when I was trying to get Prometheus to scrape the data that the exporter was showing. I was like, well, it wasn't working and it was really frustrating. And then I realized that I could go and look at the Prometheus data sources again in a web interface and see that there was a different networking error within Docker. So being able to know those debug steps is really helpful when you're doing prototyping. And then the last thing that I did is I stacked 3 different commands together into a bash script that allowed me to stop all the Docker containers, make some changes, start them all, and then output the list of IPs of Docker containers, because those IPs change every time you restart. So being able to know the latest IP for the Postgres exporter, know the latest IP for Prometheus, to being able to go and check the changes you made actually took effect. So I'll actually be citing this in the forum post because it was extremely helpful, and was talking to one of my other medic colleagues about adding that to the development guide too for Watchdog.
Yeah, so one of the things we're also working on this quarter was on interoperability, just building up from the work we did in the first quarter of this year. So what is new currently is that we have a course on interoperability. So this will basically just showcase on what we did, how we built the mediators, the standards, and our proof of concept. So you're very much welcome to explore that. We'll be making some announcements later this month. You're also looking into having this work also in production with OpenMRS-based systems. So one of the systems is Kenya EMR. Kenya EMR is an OpenMRS-based system that is fronted by the Ministry of Health in Kenya. It has scale because it is in about 2,000 or 2,000 plus facilities in Kenya. So we're looking into having ICHIS, which is an instance of the CHT just interoperating with OpenMRS. We're also looking to collaborate with the OpenMRS core community to build a reference app for integration between the CHT and OpenMRS. So that's also something we probably do in this quarter. Yeah, so the other, Craig had mentioned one was on having reliable and scalable dashboards. So in our last demo, we showcased the power of CHT Sync. So generally, the analytics database, which is Postgres, just requires normalized data for consumption by the dashboards. So what happens currently is the native data on CouchDB is stored in JSON column, which is not very useful. So it is converted. It is converted and translated into CHT into Postgres, and then that's what Couch2PG and CHT Sync do. However, they are different in implementation. They differ quite much in implementation. So for Couch2PG, they are defined time intervals based on the configuration that you will do, as opposed to CHT Sync, which is near real time, as it constantly updates listens to the CouchDB and constantly updates the Postgres. So that would mean that from an implementation perspective, it is an enhancement, that's CHT Sync, and then we're currently looking into documenting that. What you see on your right is CHT Sync. So one of the things I also like to note is that there's no UI. It's a backend feature, and it can actually be deployed independently of the version you're having on CHT, or the version of CHT that you have currently deployed. Yeah, so in a nutshell, the user experience if you use CHT Sync, in a nutshell, you have a better user experience based on the constant listening of CouchDB and translating this into Postgres. So your user experience will definitely improve. The goal for this is just to eventually substitute Couch2PG, and we are looking forward to having this in production. The thing we're currently working on, as I mentioned, is documentation on migration, how you can move from Couch2PG to CHT Sync and pipeline. This will probably be ready by the next round of call, and we'll make the announcements probably before then. And then also looking into deployment in the real world. Currently, we are working with one of our partners in Uganda. We'll see how that goes, and then based on these learnings, we are looking to scaling it nationally. So we are looking at Uganda and Kenya. Those are the two East African countries that have this scale. We're using CHT nationally, and yeah, we are happy to share these learnings with the team, and any learnings that we get will be documented. For the migration from Couch2PG to CHT Sync.
Thanks, Phil. But before we go to Q&A, there are a lot of questions in the last roundup call on CHT Sync. I think there's a bit of scare there and excitement for people who would like to use CHT Sync. Maybe are there questions that were asked last time that you need to clarify that maybe that you hadn't talked about last time?
So one of the questions that came up was the difference between Couch2PG and CHT Sync. I think I've tried to explain that. We also have I also shared a forum post a few weeks ago. I've just put it on chat. I shared a forum post on how we can, on some of the questions that came up. So basically, the difference is just implementation. They serve the same purpose, moving data from CouchDB to Postgres. However, they differ in implementation because one, you have to set the interval. You have to set the time interval. That's Couch2PG. It could also mean that if you load it with a lot of data, it means that a dashboard could take some time to actually pull the data, as opposed to CHT Sync, where if it's because of the constant sync, it's about 5 seconds. That's we call it real-time sync, near real-time sync, because of the 5 seconds, because it actually has these 5 seconds there. So that's the differences in terms of implementation. The other question was on, let me just check. The other question was on dashboards, whether what dashboards we support. Currently, it's Superset, and the reason for that is it's also open source and it's easy to use. However, we are curious to know what other dashboard platforms the community would like us to look at. You can reach us through the community forum or through myself. I'll put my email on chat as well.